Hi, my name is Lexi, and I'm going to be talking about the hormones of the female reproductive system and how they kind of drive that process. So first I'm going to give you a little background about how eggs develop. So we have the ovaries that are kind of the female equivalent to the testes in a male, and what they do is they produce eggs and hormones. So we start out with about 7 million oogania cells that develop into 500,000 primary oocytes. And then these cells go through a bunch of cell divisions and go from primary follicles right here to secondary follicles to tertiary follicles. And not all of the 7 million cells become primary oocytes. So what happens through that process is a testria. So it's like it'll go from, which is scheduled cell death. So it kind of limits the amount of development that occurs. So what happens is this whole process is controlled by hormones, and some of the main ones are GnRH, which is secreted by the hypothalamus. We have FSH and LH, which are secreted by the anterior pituitary. And then we have estrogen, progesterone, inhibin, and AMH that are secreted by the ovaries. So we're going to go into more detail about the ovarian cycle, but I'll just kind of sum it up for you here. So we have the follicular phase, which is when follicle growth occurs within the ovaries, which takes about 10 to 21 days. And at this stage, the primary hormones are estrogen and AMH. And the function of AMH is to prevent too many follicles from developing at one time. And then the third phase of this cycle is the luteal phase, which is when the corpus luteum secretes hormones to prepare for pregnancy. And the dominant hormone in this phase is progesterone, but there's also some estrogen mixed in there as well. Now we'll go into more detail about these three phases. We have the follicular phase, and this kind of splits up into an early to a mid-late stages. So in the early phase, hormones from the hypothalamus, so the GnRH and from the anterior pituitary, so LH and FSH, are secreted and begin follicular maturation. Granulosa cells are also starting to secrete AMH, and like I said before, the function of that is to prevent more recruitment of follicles that will develop. And then the secretion of LH and FSH actually forms a positive feedback with estrogen, so the more LH and FSH that is secreted, it always increases the amount of estrogen. So then from the mid to late follicular phase, this is when only one follicle is continuing to develop. So granulosa cells are now starting to secrete inhibin, estrogen, and progesterone. And what happens is kind of like a chain reaction. So the more estrogen you have, the increase in estrogen makes a GnRH surge. So a surge is just like the level of that hormone goes up pretty high. So the more estrogen creates a GnRH surge, and then the GnRH surge actually causes an LH surge, and somewhat of an FSH surge, but it's a lesser degree than the LH. But the LH surge is super important because it's essential for mitotic divisions that will go on in some of the final steps of maturation. Then we have ovulation, which is the second phase of this cycle. And it occurs about 16 to 24 hours after the highest peak of the LH surge. What happens is the mature follicles start to secrete prostaglandins and proteolytic enzymes. And what these enzymes do is they assist in follicular wall rupture so that the egg can be released from the ovary and it'll flow into the fallopian tube, and it may or may not get fertilized at that point. And then the last phase is the luteal phase, which is again kind of split up into two different portions. So in the early to mid luteal phase, the luteal cells will accumulate lipid and glycogen, and then the corpus luteum produces progesterone, estrogen, and inhibin. And the progesterone is the dominant enzyme in this at this point, but the combination of estrogen and inhibin, it exerts a negative feedback loop on the hypothalamus, so the secretion of G and RH, and then the pituitary gland, which is FH and, I'm sorry, not FH, LH and FSH. So estrogen and inhibin will cause the downregulation of those hormones from being produced. And then in the late luteal phase, this is when pregnancy may or may not occur. So if it doesn't occur, the hormone levels will continue to fall. And then the continuous decline of the hormones will cause apoptosis, which is another kind of scheduled cell death. So when all the cells die, the egg will be discarded from the body through the menstruation cycle. So that will occur and last about 3 to 7 days, which overlaps into the next follicular phase. So by the time a woman is on her period, her next follicles are already beginning to develop.